Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lecture on nonviolent movements. So let's start with Jorge Luis Borges and his citation. Jorge Luis Borges was um, uh, Argentinian writer, author who got a Nobel Prize for literature. But he dealt with certain social issues in his writing. So I found this citation of his very interesting. Violence is this last sanctuary of the weak. What does that mean? Well, when states, elites, and groups resort to violence, it is a show of weakness, and it means that there is no real trust among different parties or other means to resolve conflict but violence. So it is, in a way, a sign of weakness, especially, I guess, when it's perpetrated by the state. So now let's look at some key figures, fathers, theorists of nonviolence, um, and how they inspired the nonviolent movements and, in general, nonviolent ideology. So, when we talk about fathers of nonviolence, we have to mention Henry David Thoreau. He is a famous American philosopher um, who wrote an influential essay, a seminal essay called Civil Disobedience in 1849. And this essay is an argument for disobedience to an unjust state. So, mind you, he lived in the 19th century. And this essay was his protest against slavery and the Mexican American War that took place in 1846, 1848. That was the time of American expansionism, a time when US actually annexed Texas and Oregon and so on. But what it meant, this Mexican-American War, is the spread of slavery. And he was a lifelong abolitionist. And he was, of course, against the war and the policies of the state. So what he did, he refused to pay taxes. As a citizen, he refused to pay taxes to the state because he thought that the state didn't do proper work, and he ended up in prison. And in prison, he wrote this essay, Civil Disobedience. He was, of course, released later on. His aunt paid his taxes, so he was released. But this essay became so influential that it influenced the political thought and actions of very important figures such as Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and so on, who were all proponents of nonviolence and nonviolent strategies, disobedience when fighting against faulty or unjust state policies. So that's Henry David Thoreau, and he was also famous for writing Walden. But you can learn. I'm sure you learned about him in your history classes. But it's good to just look at it once, and see who this man was, and so on. Okay, so let's now move to Martin Luther King Jr. As we all know, he was the leader of the civil rights movement in the US. And basically, he noted in his autobiography that his first encounter with the idea of nonviolent resistance was reading Civil Disobedience. And that happened in 1944 while he was attending Morehouse College. And he wrote in his autobiography that this was this left a big impact on his thinking. Said here in this courageous New Englander's refusal to pay taxes and his choice of jail rather than support a war that would spread slavery's territory into Mexico, I made my first contact with the theory of nonviolent resistance. So these are some citations from King's autobiography, where he actually mentions how he first came across the ideas of civil disobedience and nonviolence. Another important father and a figure activist in nonviolence and nonviolent movements was Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, you must train the nonviolent army for so long that the battle becomes unnecessary. This is one of the key ideas of nonviolent movements, and also it can be seen as a challenge, because nonviolent strategies are long-term strategies, so they require patience and persistence. So this is something that works, but it's happening over a longer period of time. So you need to be dedicated to the cause. So although it works, violence is seen by many as a much quicker fix of the problem. But the problem with violence, like using violence like a revolution, with revolutions, with violent revolutions, things don't usually go as they were planned, and violence always leaves a trail of consequences and grievances that are very difficult to address post violence. But nonviolent strategies bring about a more peaceful and stable society, because they are about also building a new kind of a relationship with the opponent. So that is very important, and they are much more constructive. Okay, so here we have two different ideologies. We have this ideology of Machiavelli that was proposed by Machiavelli, and that became, how to say, like a motto for realpolitik and realist view of the world. And that is this saying that means justify ends. That is a Machiavellian outlook on the world. So as long as we get what we want, it doesn't matter what kind of means or approaches we used. Right? So that's what Machiavelli is saying. So totally opposite motto, totally opposite philosophy is given by Gandhi, who says, means and ends are inseparable. Means are, after all, everything. So that's totally opposite. So means really matter, and you cannot separate outcomes, results from the means. Why? Because through the means we use, we are actually building this new relationship with our opponent. So as I already mentioned, if you use violent, coercive, and unjust means, whatever ends you produce, these ends, these results will embed some kind of injustice, some kind of grievance that will come to haunt you. Okay, so Gandhi saw that there is a different way to change the world in a more sustainable way, and that is to really think about the means and approaches before you to really think and plan before you move into action towards a certain end. And a key Gandhian concept is satyagraha. So this concept, it's a key concept in his philosophy, in his ideology of nonviolence. And this concept means insistence on truth, or force of love, force of truth. So this is the essence of disobedience. Because why? Why truth? Well, truth, he said, is something that we seek for together with our enemy. He says that neither party in a conflict has the ultimate truth, that the truth that we have is partial, and that we have to work together to see each other's views, see each other's how we look at the truth, how we look at the reality. And through this process of interacting and seeking the truth together, these are relational processes. And through these processes, we are actually building this new kind of relationship with the enemy, so-called enemy, right? But it can be a group or a government that has different policy, different view than us. So this satyagraha ideology influenced Mandela in South Africa, influenced King in the United States, and many other social justice and other movements, nonviolent movements. It's an important concept that we are seeking the truth together, and nobody has like the monopoly of the truth. Okay, so now Gandhi also mentioned that for nonviolent struggle, we need we need to be patient and compassionate towards the opponent. And as I mentioned, this is not a quick thing. It's not a quick fix. It leads to a lot of suffering. But what it means is that we are not giving up on seeking the truth together. So the truth exists in us and outside us. How do we get to the truth? This can only be together and through some kind of a relational or interactive process. So, but how do we get the so-called enemy to listen to us? Well, there is a lot of strategies. And you will watch the documentary that I attached in the slides, and see how one movement used humor, used values of love, care, reaching out to the other, even to the enemy, in order to get the so-called enemy to listen to them. So, according to Gandhi, we need to convert rather than coerce the opponent to find the truth or the just end. So, and as I said, there needs to be a transformation of this relationship, and it usually starts by offering a hand to the other. And started communicating in some way with the other, finding a way to have the other listen to you. And this is a constructive, in a way, it can be said that this is a constructive conflict resolution. So in the documentary that you have for this class, it's a documentary about the Otpor movement. Otpor means resistance in Serbian. So this is a movement in Serbia that in the 1990s, when the wars were happening, so the young people the students organized this movement, and it actually spread and included most of the population of Serbia in the end. This movement was successful in toppling President Milosevic eventually. So they said, we won. One of the leaders of this movement, Srđan Popović, said, we won because we love life more. So what does that mean? There were this decade of conflicts, of apathy and despair in Serbia and the Balkans in general, in former Yugoslavia, especially among youth who lived in this wartime and who didn't have a lot of prospects for jobs, for traveling. They didn't have money. They didn't have much, to look forward to. So they realize that they have to unify, that their members can unify around a sense of common values, common human values that need to be restored. So during the war, the primary emotion in the population is fear and distrust. But this movement wanted to emphasize love and care and empathy towards the others. So they were basically reclaiming basic human values and stressing the need to reclaim human life that was lost in this time of war, a decade of war. So in a way, the nonviolent approaches and strategies are reclaiming these deep human values for life, values for care, for empathy towards the other. Right. So this is very important, and this also goes well with the Thoreau's ideology and Martin Luther King's thinking, and Mandela, and so on. Now, nonviolent action is about destabilizing conflict systems. So conflict system, what do I mean by conflict system? Conflict system is a system that is that has this embedded structural and cultural violence within, and sometimes eruptions of direct violence. And they become very close, very biased, very non-interactive. These societies, become so divided, and they do not. So each side, they don't allow questioning or inquiry. They just believe that their story is correct, and they cannot even listen to the other. So it's us who are correct, good, and victimized, while the other side is wrong, bad, and aggressive. So when you have this kind of societies, you can call it's like a conflict system, because it's very biased, it's very polarized. Different factions cannot listen to each other. So this is not an open system, it's a very closed system. So introducing values of empathy, love, relationship building, trust, all of that destabilizes conflict systems. And that's what these nonviolent movements do. So, peaceful societies, non-violent societies, can exist at different levels, right? And it's interesting, there are certain studies and books that look at the characteristic. What is the peaceful society? What is a peaceful state? What's peaceful society, and what it means to be a peaceful individual, non-violent individual. And there are many examples of peaceful societies that show that aggression and violence can be overcome through promotion of values of peace and creation of interdependence. For example, in anthropology, you have the studies of some indigenous people. So you have from people from like a tribe from Brazil, Upper Xingu, that actually pride themselves on their value system, according to which warfare is morally repugnant and the warrior role is neither valued or rewarded. So the words for war, for warrior, battle don't even exist. So that this kind of societies actually show that people are not necessarily aggressive, violent, and so on, but we are in a way we learned that from through the narrative, through history, and so on, because in our cultures, say especially Western cultures, uh, uh, we celebrate in history big warriors. We celebrate big battles. We celebrate, this kind of behavior. I'm not saying it shouldn't be celebrated, but it in a way glorifies conflict and war, while maybe if the history books put more emphasis on not on Alexander the Great, but on some scientist and what he did or she did for the world, maybe we would be thinking differently about war, conflict, and the way our society should look like. In terms of states that are peaceful, Switzerland can be an example, because Switzerland was is a country that has a lot of different ethnic groups, and these ethnic groups have their cantons. It's called cantons, but still there was a merging of these cantons because of economic and religious interests. And Switzerland, like a few hundred years ago, had terrible wars among these different ethnic groups that lived there. But they decided, okay, so war is not good for progress. War is not good for the society will not work out if we are constantly fighting. And now Switzerland is the most stable and most progressive country at many different levels, but it consists still of these different ethnic groups living in these cantons. And individuals that can be an example of nonviolence and that had these transformative roles through peaceful strategies. Okay, we mentioned Gandhi, we mentioned Thoreau, we mentioned King, but we should mention here also Nelson Mandela. So Nelson Mandela, when he was young, he started as part of this organization that did some sabotage, and it was proclaimed by the regime as a terrorist organization, and that's why he was imprisoned. But in prison, he was reading Thoreau, he was reading Gandhi, he was learning about these other leaders, and he was reading about nonviolent strategies, and he changed his attitude. So when he spent almost like 27 years in prison, but what he did in prison, it's an interesting thing. He became friends with a guard, with a guard who was white, and they started talking about issues and so on. And he learned the language. So he learned the language, and he he envisioned in prison this new idea of a peaceful South Africa. And when he went out of the prison, he was the first democratically elected president, but he chose reconciliation and peace, not revenge and violence. And that's why, although South Africa has a lot of problems, but this idea of unity and ability of people of different races and ethnicity to live together, it was really his leadership that made that happen. So it's a really important figure when we talk about nonviolence and nonviolent approaches. And also, there were studies. There were studies that, like this Chenoweth, the book by Chenoweth and Stefan, that looked at the change that is produced through nonviolent means, and they discovered. So this is an empirical study based on many cases that they looked at, and they discovered that change generated through nonviolent means leads to a more sustainable peace. Now this is crucial. This is a crucial finding that you should remember, and it's very important for our field, I think, because we are the field in conflict resolution. We are claiming that through constructive conflict resolution, which is dialogue, which is negotiation, which is problem solving workshops, mediation, diplomacy, that through these kinds of means we can have better outcomes, and we can have a change that is more sustainable, and we would not have grievances that come through aggression and violent conflict. Okay, so this is proven through this book and through this study, and we can argue that nonviolent action in conflicts is more responsible and better option for most of the people than the violent action. And you have a look at this book, the chapters from this book, Why Civil Resistance Works, the Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict, and you will see the examples and the data that support that view. And here is the video that I told you about. This is about Otpor movement, and it's called Bringing Down a Dictator. So it's an interesting movie, and you will see, you can compare the strategies of this movement with some current movements and so on, but it's quite interesting. And I would finish with this citation from Martin Luther King Jr. As I delve deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, my skepticism concerning the power of love gradually diminished, and I came to see for the first time its potency in the area of social reform. It was in this Gandhian emphasis on love and nonviolence that I discovered the method for social reform that I have been seeking. So, love and forgiveness to the opponents. That is an important, it's a new thing. But I talked about this, what it means, love. It's not a romantic love. It's basically the willingness to start talking with the other, with the opponent. How could these opponents respond by jailing the people that are offering them forgiveness, that are reaching out to them, giving them hand? It's very difficult. And if they respond with violence, they are actually showing weakness, and they cannot win. Because if you have a non-violent protest and the police, the government sends the troops that beat up the protesters or jail them or whatever, who wins in this situation? Right? It's the protesters who win, because they didn't do anything wrong. They were just showing with their presence what they want. They didn't attack anyone. So this is very important. Okay, so I will finish with this, and I look forward to watch the video, the documentary, and reflect on readings and the documentary in your blog. So I look forward to reading your reflections and your thoughts on this relevant topic. Okay, so see you next time. Bye.